Greetings to everybody watching. My name is David Muhammad, and today I represent the Karate for Change movement. The goal of Karate for Change is to address social injustices both in and out of the karate world. We recognize that the world of sport karate is not immune to the many struggles facing humanity. We aim to utilize our various platforms to amplify the voices of those that too often go unheard. We are hoping to host a continuous series of discussions that tap into the dynamics of race, gender, religion, and other subgroups that show up in the world of karate. These last few months have seen the entire world halt to both COVID-19 and racial injustice. Throughout the globe, people are standing up, demanding justice and equality for their Black brothers and sisters. And while we are seeing amazing progress, this struggle is one that is not new. Today, we'll be discussing the Black karate experience with 3 U.S. karateka that I'm honored to be in the virtual presence of. Starting with James Payne. James Payne was born in 1995, raised in Hampton Roads area. He started training martial arts at the age of 5 and studied at Old Dominion University, earning a BS or Bachelor of Science in Sports Management. Currently, he is studying at the College of William & Mary, earning his MBA. He's competed internationally in Italy, Romania, Spain, Austria, and Brazil, is a member of the AAU national team, and is in the USA Karate team pool. Thank you, James, for being with us. Next, on to a brother and a mentor to me, Brian Hobson. Brian Hobson started his training in 1982 at the age of 12 in traditional Shorin-ryu karate in Hampton, Virginia, under the tutelage of legendary instructor Frank D.R. Hargrove. He made the first junior U.S. karate team in 1984 and has been a member of the U.S. team, was a member of the U.S. team for 10 years. In that time, he amassed over 20 national championships in Kata, Kumite and Kobudo. He has a sociology degree from Hampton University, the Hampton University, as I should say, and a master's in sports management from the U.S. Sports Academy. He is the founder and owner of Brian Hobson Karate Studio that has been established since 1999 and has produced various U.S. team members and is currently a 9th degree black belt. Thank you for being with us, Brian.
Thank you.
And last but not least, a woman who needs no introduction, is the Cheryl Murphy. She is a 17-time national champion, World Combat Games silver and bronze medalist, World Games bronze medalist, Jet Magazine and Sports Illustrated Faces in the Crowd 2013, Pan Am Games bronze medalist, 6-time Pan American champion, 2-time WKF World Women's Team bronze medalist, 6-time US Open champion, 2-time Shotokan World champion, German Open silver and bronze medalist, Copenhagen gold medalist, Long Island University, and got her master's in science, MS in community health management. Also graduated from the Morgan State University with a bachelor's of science in healthcare and business administration. So we thank Cheryl Murphy for being here with us. And this all makes me feel extremely average. So I'm glad that I could be in their presence. And so, again, at this time, we're going to just have a conversation. The goal is to make this as organic as possible. We hope that those who are watching can be inspired by what we talk about and hopefully go on and have their own conversations. And so with that, let's jump right in, guys. And again, feel free to unmute yourself whenever the spirit moves you. Now, in the karate world, there's a saying that representation matters, or in society right now, there's a saying that representation matters. And the world of karate is one that doesn't currently have a lot of representation when it comes to Black athletes, which makes me wonder, how diverse was your martial arts experience coming up? Who did you look to for representation as an aspiring karateka and athlete? And I want to kick that off with you, Cheryl.
So as I came up, actually my dojo was very cultural and interracial. My instructors were all mostly Black, and those students that were right above me were Asian. So we were very multicultural. Not until I got into USA Karate and get on the team did I find that there wasn't as much different kinds of cultures. So that's where I kind of hit a wall in trying to find that representation. which definitely affected me in how I came up in USA Karate. So though I was definitely blessed to just have such a multicultural dojo, it definitely hit a wall when I came to be with USA Karate. So that definitely was something that affected me.
Brian, what about yourself? I know that your instructor you trained under was also a Black male, but was the rest of your dojo environment like that?
Well, I came up again, somewhat of a mix in the suburbs of Hampton, Virginia. So growing up, it was probably 30% Black to 70% white. And so of course our dojo reflected that. But having a Black or African-American instructor, head instructor, that of course kind of let people know, hey, this guy, you know, he looks like me. If he can do it, I can do it. So that was my experience.
And James, what about yourself?
So I actually had the luxury to train with Hanshi Brian Hobson, who's on this panel with us. And he did an amazing job setting, showing that there are African-American male and female athletes that can provide that inspiration for young Black men, well, a young Black kid as I was at the time. And so for me, although as Hanshi Brian Hobson said that it was about 30 to 70%. At the same time, for me growing up in the dojo, I was really blessed to see a lot of African-American athletes, and he did a really good job making sure that all of his students were able to see the African-American talent in the area, whether it was, you know, some of our fellow friends of Rodney Cheeseman or Carl West. There's different guys in this area that are in the Hampton Roads area that Hanshi Hobson brought around his dojo to inspire a lot of not just African-American kids, but just any kid in general, because these guys were talented. And not to mention, obviously, you heard the credentials, but Hanshi Hobson's also talented as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because all of you kind of essentially said that in the walls of your dojo, you found that community aspect. I had the same blessing, right? My father was my martial arts instructor. Most of the people in my dojo, especially when I was younger, were Black. And even in my local tournament circuit, it was all very Black. It was once I went onto competing on a higher level where I felt I didn't see that representation. So for all of you, when you went and made that transition, who did you look to then when you were typically, you know, one of the few? And anybody can jump in on that.
I mean, I'll jump in. So my instructor, Herb Wiles, Black, and pretty much the patriarch of the dojo, there was an instructor that I had, my dojo brother, DJ, who would pull a lot of the younger athletes up to do the extra. So not just what was happening in the dojo, but what he would take us to the track and have us run the field, right? So that's who I really look to, and again, is within my dojo. When I went out into the world, there wasn't anybody within the U.S. that I can actually say. Not until I got even more experience that I start to hear, like Wayne Otto. There was a Brazilian brothers that I was fortunate to train with as well that were here that happened to be Black. But outside of that, that's really the experience that I had, where I could actually look to, and it still had to be within my own community, not necessarily outward.
And Brian, I'll come to you next because you were on the first junior team. Now I know that if we look at our history, there were guys like Billy Blanks. A lot of people don't know that he came up in USA Karate. But was it guys like him that you looked to, or were there others, or were you?
Actually, Billy Blanks. I don't remember his name back then. However, Toki Hill was the main guy, of course, because he had won the world championship. I think the year that I actually started karate in 1982 or 1980. So of course, everybody was talking about Toki. Him and Toki were roommates and had trained together and that type of thing. But by the time I actually started my first nationals in 1983, because I started karate in 82 and 83 is when I went to my first nationals, everybody, of course, was talking about Toki Hill. I didn't know who he was. But of course, eventually you found that. But he wasn't, I think he had already left by that time. But the main person that we would look to, I guess, for guidance was a guy by the name of Thomas LaPuppet. And LaPuppet basically was I think he was the treasurer of AAU Karate, and then transitioned to when the USA Karate Federation separated. And him and my instructor were really good friends. They went back to the 60s and on that tournament circuit, that type of thing. So whenever we actually had a gripe or tried to understand something that didn't happen or did happen, we would always know that he would at least get it to us straight. And so, and God rest his soul, LaPuppet, we appreciate you. We have not forgotten about you.
Oh man, I tell you, you bringing up his name makes me think about old karate magazines my dad had laying around. Read about him,
Yes.
how you do Basadaya in reverse, and even talking with guys like Cedric Barksdale, who was a direct student of LaPuppet. There's just such an aura. So yeah, God rest his soul. Now, James, you're the young buck on the panel here. Who have you looked to coming up as representation in this new era?
So as far as the new era goes, I'll be honest, a lot of the guys that I look up to are part of the old era. And I don't mean to call it the old era, but for instance, Hanshi Hobson's on this panel, and he was my karate teacher. And so I had one of the best in the country right in front of me. So I had that blessing. But there are also, obviously, Cheryl Murphy's on this panel as well. And, she's really handled business for years and years to come. So she can take old era, new era, whatever era she wants. But yeah, so as far as myself, looking up to other athletes, I had a really great atmosphere and environment around my dojo. And so I was able to see, as I named some of the other guys, Carl West was a really talented guy, firecracker, super fast, a guy that I looked up to, like, man, I want to be able to kumite like Carl West. And then there are even some very strong kata practitioners that were also around our dojo as well. So I had the luxury of having a great dojo family and having African-American athletes around me. But even nationally, you had Cheryl Murphy really leading the charge for me as I looked up to her, and still to this day, as I compete, look up to her and have conversations with her that help me sharpen my skills as a competitor.
Absolutely. And I think all of us on this panel can talk about how Cheryl has been a beacon of light and hope for us, no matter what generation we represent. And transitioning in that conversation, there's a term that's being tossed around a lot right now that we as Blacks have dealt with both in and out of karate, and that's the term of being one of the only, or being the only. And it's it refers to being one of the only people of color in a room. And so speaking about that in the world of sport karate, what are some of your experiences of being one of the only? And how have you learned to navigate that? Because that's the reality, right? That's the reality, is that we are in a sport that is not necessarily populated by people who look like us. And so you learn how to, and all of you have been around the art for long enough to have had to navigate it, or else you wouldn't have had the success that you've had. And so what are some ways in which you've dealt with that phenomenon? Anybody can jump in.
Well, let me jump in again. Well, in my mind, when I first started in '82, if there was a karate tournament in Virginia, chances are we were going to be there. Whether it was an open tournament, whether it was a traditional tournament, we were going. So, you never knew if you were going against Taekwondo guy, if you were going against a Kung Fu guy, or whatever the case may be. And so we just went, and AAU happened to also be what we also did, and that eventually turned into USA Karate Federation. But I could totally see, not necessarily so much in Virginia, but once you went to the national championship, you went from a multicultural situation for tournaments. That once you started going to national championships, which of course is a money thing, right? So economically, it costs to travel, then to eat in these cities that probably a little bit more expensive than your own, than hotel and so on and so forth. And the tournament fees go from $25 back then to now this 65 to 75. So you had the budget for that. So not a lot of Black folks that were doing well at a local level actually were able to go up into that next echelon. And you saw a lot of people that were definitely talented, but just couldn't continue. And then we saw people that actually went on to the national championship level, but when it was time to actually make a team, or went and made the team, but couldn't afford to travel internationally. It was just one of those things, and whether their dojo put money together for them, whatnot, that's just what it was. But being the only, I mean, I was definitely one of those guys that were, went, next thing you know, you're going on a trip and you're supposed to meet people in the airport at this particular hub, and you look around and everybody goes, okay, everybody's here, let's go. And you look around and you're the only brother in there. And that's just what it was. You go, oh, all right, it's going to be one of those bad. And a lot of times, most of the, not even a coach, for a long time, we didn't have any Black representation for being a coach. And so it was just one of those things. You just had to, okay, all right. I mean, you had to go forward. I mean, you had a job to do and you did your best.
I see a lot of head nodding of similar experiences. I'm gonna call out Cheryl, because Cheryl was that was like when I made my first U.S. team. She was the only other, one of the only others, her and Brian Hilliard. But she was the only one I knew at the time. That was before I actually knew Brian. And so, those moments where you're looking for somebody, So Cheryl, what has your experience been like? Because I know you've had a long history.
Right. For me, it's definitely something to have to maneuver through. And it wasn't always easy. I'll be honest about that. It definitely wasn't always easy being able to, just have those types of conversations, things that we may notice. Something simple for me that I would, go to an international tournament and I would stop to look at two Black athletes competing against each other in the second round with 80 people in the division, right? So I would take note to certain things like that and would have no one to really speak to on that unless it ended up being some, next conversation that you really don't want to get into at a tournament. You're just there to compete, do well, hopefully you're on that podium, and then now you enjoy the rest of the tournament, right? So just certain things like that I found in just having those cultural types of conversations, I found that I didn't have that space. So it definitely was a difficult way of maneuvering through and finding that space where I was that comfortable to have those types of conversations. And so, I mean, that's really, my take on just being the only in a lot of different situations in different aspects within my experience, that it was definitely hard for me to maneuver through.
Absolutely. James, what about yourself?
So for me, just as Cheryl was touching on, I experienced a good amount of microaggressions. I actually was competing more in the AAU circuit on the national team there, and you'd hear things that become generalization of African-American athletes warming up. People would ask what I was listening to or which rapper I was listening to, and I'd say I'm listening to Lenny Kravitz, but the generalization is like, oh, he's listening to some hood rap, and it's,
right.
And they don't, a lot of people who do that don't see the impact of that or what that actually means. But the generalization of just being the one and only, or the one of the only, that in itself kind of pushes a lot of those, as Cheryl was saying, you're kind of on your own. And I'm blessed with two parents that raised me to understand that I will be going through a lot of that in life. And I've got to be ready for that. So as I experienced those things, I understood, okay, this is that. It's all good. It's not going to change the way I perform. But I will say, being the one of the only, it adds an extra element to competition, especially when you're overseas. It adds an extra element that you've got to have you. And not to say that there was no support on the national teams. There were supportive people. At the same time, only a few understand that struggle of being one of the only. And so to Cheryl's point, and even Hanshi Hobson's, it's one of those situations that you're in where you have to really, I'd say, dig deep, but also understand your why for competing.
Cheryl, I saw you nodding your head. Did some things he say resonate with you?
Oh, no, absolutely. I've had plenty of situations where those microaggressions would happen. Black female, natural hair, braids, certain comments that would happen, whether it was purposeful or not, definitely had effect to me. When you get described to other people being very, being strong, being athletic, and then you'll hear your white counterparts being described to as being pretty and not being able to take a hit. Like, it's just those type of things you take notice to. And again, who do I then speak to in trying to relate to that? So I would have to contain that, or long distance call someone, right? And that it definitely makes you dig deeper, but at times for me, I know it definitely took effect. So and like I said, it was definitely challenging maneuvering through, having to hear those types of things. But at times it definitely was the edge I needed to perform as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Hanshi Hobson, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. A couple of USA Karate Federation trips that you would go on, they would field teams if it wasn't a big time international competition. And they would say, okay, all we have here today is fighters, but we need some kata representation. And I remember, Coach Madden going, okay, everybody's going to get out here right now in practice and do their best kata, and we're going to figure out who's going to represent us in kata. And and you can just see, people you're looking around and stuff as everybody's practicing their kata, and they're going, the black guy can do kata.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes not microaggression, right? Sometimes we downright like,
yeah.
Can I take offense to that? Like, what?
Absolutely right.
All right. Like, okay. Right. No, it's true. It's absolutely true.
Exactly. Yeah. So, twice internationally, I competed in kata for the U.S. team, just off of humbug. And even though I had won gold medal in kata as an adult, but in the open division, so it was only one kata, not a series of kata. But they're just like, oh, okay, who's this guy? I didn't know he could do kata too.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at the team, there isn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, there aren't any black kata people.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right? That being said, that doesn't mean there are no black kata people who can actually perform. So you have to look, and I would take note to that, but who would I have that conversation with unless we're all kind of in the same space and then we'll have a conversation. Right. So that goes to just being able to, in that environment, when those things come up, you have to internalize it. And at some point, again, I know for me, at some point, constantly having to internalize those types of situations, because it's an every time kind of thing, not in just karate, but in life, right? After 5 years, I worked for a corporate company. And within that, the same thing. From elementary school, I was in a predominantly white school all the way up until high school. Not until I got to Morgan State did I actually feel surrounded by, some type of support. So it's not only in this situation, but in multiple life experiences where you have to constantly internalize, or you can then be subdued to the stereotypes that come with being a black female and then expressing how you feel, and it can be taken a certain type of way.
Yeah, I kind of also want to, what you said, Cheryl. I mean, as an athlete, but we also have to look back at as a referee. Yeah. So referees, and they sit there and they look at kata athletes, and they got a black person or a black athlete and a white athlete. In their mind, they've probably never seen a black person do kata on the U.S. team at that level. So here we are, and only up to the last couple of years, they're throwing flags. And so even if they are, right at the same, they go, well, I think, this is the one I'm used to seeing. And they might not say that to themselves, but something is telling them, that's what they want to do. And flags, and I'm going to tell you guys, and I'm sure you felt it too, but you don't want to be the one with the one blue flag and everybody else has red flag, and they go, oh man. So that, people start looking at, okay, well, what is everybody else going to score? And that's almost that peer pressure. And that's just what it is. But I'm glad they kind of went back to scoring. So it takes that pressure off of being that one lone guy. But, if you're not comfortable, that's what happens. And I think that's why we see a lot of lack of Black athletes in Kata, because it's just so, what does this person look like even before they've done the first move?
Right. And I mean, you say, sorry, David, but you also talk about that in flags. I feel like that was the case even in fighting. So there's a certain quote unquote look that, that it seems as if that's what's happening. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, James. I can tell this triggers something.
Yeah. So just to add, even in Kumite, as being a Black athlete, it's almost like there is an immediate, again, a generalization of what you're going to be. Okay, you're fast and you're going to hit hard and the warnings are ready to fly, and you see it where I always joke with a fellow competitor who's also African-American, Kenneth McElmore, and he's in the USA team pool as well. We joke about the fact that, we know we're going to get warnings just based off of doing what other people are going to do and not get warnings. And that is a very, very common, some people would say it's a myth. We believe it's the truth. And I'm sure other athletes could resonate with that as well. But again, that is a part of the systemic problem that we're going to fix here. And the reason why we're doing things like this, to talk about these things and fix those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we have to look at is what you guys are speaking to is a lot of subjective things that we notice that maybe somebody would say, well, I don't see it, right? Mm-hmm. It's not explicit. It's not a Confederate flag in the middle of the tatami. Right. It's not a referee standing up and saying that. And then around karate, there's a lot of mystique to character and honor and all of these things that we teach in our dojos that don't necessarily always resonate or get seen or shown in practice, right? And so, and that's just a byproduct of what we see in society. So when you look at the fact that Black people are not a monolith, we're not all the same, but there are stereotypes that peg us. So when we look at something like Kata, which is considered to be more the artistic side, the intellectual side, right? We're supposed to be the freak athletes that can jump out the building and run faster than everybody else and be super aggressive, right? Look at how they peg Serena Williams. They'll never say she won because she's smarter players. They'll say she's so strong, she's so powerful, even though you have to be super intellectual to play a game like tennis. And so, not to go too deep into that because I'll go all day on that, but looking at, okay, well, some of the outcomes of it, right? We see a lot of depictions of Black people in media, and how they're portrayed. Have you ever felt tokenized as a Black athlete? So, of course, there's the idea of being one of the only, but have you ever felt like, as a result of being one of those only, have you ever felt like you've been kind of used as a token or as propped up to be seen as something that maybe you didn't feel comfortable with?
Well, I'll jump in. I keep jumping in. I have so many stories. So there have definitely been where I've been in part of committees where I am the only female and happen to be the only Black person part of that committee. And so again, finding the space to speak up has definitely been challenging. So I would definitely say what I need to say, but I would have to say it in a way where it wouldn't be the Black girl is actually complaining about something else. Whether it would have to be with finances, whether it would have to be even talking to people about what city the Nationals is going to be in. I would try to play it off and say, well, who really wants to go to that city? As opposed to saying, well, if we go to that city, would someone like me be welcomed? I mean, because I've definitely heard stories where even going to Virginia or West Virginia, you go into a restaurant and you have people saying the N-word. I had my my instructors tell me a story, Sensei Wiles and Sensei Utsi, tell me a story that we were in Texas and they went into a restaurant just to get something to eat, and it literally went to tumbling weeds, like it was so quiet when they walked in, and then they turned around and walked back out. You know, I've experienced, it was myself, my instructor, and a couple of my dojo brothers and sisters at the time. We would drive, this is in Florida, Broward, I forget, Broward something. And we were driving past to go to the actual convention center, and there was a sea, and I say a sea of Confederate flags in the field. And we were all like, oh geez, here we go. And as soon, once we were there, we were fine. Then it was a matter of coming back out. The first thing we talked about was, all right, we're gonna pass this field again. Hopefully they're not still there, right? So, yeah, so it ends up being where, you know, being put in certain situations where, yes, I felt like the token, and then trying to voice, you know, different opinions, different situations to make sure everyone's voice is heard, not just, you know, the majority.
I want to actually spin this question a bit, and I'm going to direct it to you, Brian. You had mentioned, and I think this flows well, so thank you, Cheryl, with that. You had mentioned, you know, oftentimes it wasn't that there weren't any other talented Black karateka. It was a lot of times an economic reason that maybe prevented them. You know, I can think of several athletes who had made the team that didn't go to international competitions for several reasons. And so then you ended up being one of the only. Did that put a pressure on you ever to feel like you had to represent for those that you knew couldn't go? And anybody can answer that, but I'm going to direct it to you first, especially because you came up in an era where there was a lot less.
Yeah. Well, honestly, when we first put that first junior team, they put the first junior team together, it was a good mix, I have to admit. But you also have to remember that was back in the day when you had a state championship and then you went straight to the nationals. So, and you know, if you happened to be on the East Coast and it was somewhere up and down the East Coast, you could definitely drive to it. Guys on the West Coast might be a little bit upset by that, but it was a good mix. And then what happened was, I remember our very first junior team abroad trip was to Taiwan to the Junior World Cup, and we went. And it was a nice group of African American representation, and so I really. I didn't ever feel like, once I did start going to the teams, the next thing you know, when it transitioned from AAU to USA Karate Federation, I felt that half of those guys either just dropped out of karate because it was just time for them to go to college or get jobs or whatever the case may be, and or it was just one of those things where, you know, they just could not afford it anymore. Did I feel like I had to win for them because they couldn't afford it? I really wasn't thinking that way. I just felt the pressure actually of, you know, maybe not being able to be totally who I was. In my own skin, I wasn't that very comfortable because I was still a young adult, 18, 19 years old. And here you are with, you know, sometimes some veteran team members that might be 4 or 5 years your senior, and you don't know them. And, you know, back then it wasn't any internet. So you really got to know people at that trip. Even people that you would see at the nationals, you only, you know, you might say hi, bye to them. Even if the guys are competing, you would just be there right at the tatami. You didn't want to be really nice to them then because you'd probably have to end up fighting them. So I didn't have that feeling of, you know, I had to represent for those people that are back home, but I felt I definitely had to represent for people, you know, Virginia or the US. That was my thing.
Yeah, well, you brought up a good point now, and this question will go to anybody about not feeling like you could be your full self.
Mm-hmm.
and people of color, especially Black people, talk about the inability to show up to work, to school, as their authentic selves. Cheryl, you mentioned wearing natural hair or sometimes having your hair braided. Could you guys talk about, and I'll start with you, James, times where you feel like you've had to adjust to the expectations of majority culture within sport karate?
Yeah, I'd say really every time I put my gi on and step on the mat, but some specific times, there was a national team that I was on that competed in Brazil, and I was the only African-American out of, males and females. I was the only one. And so I knew even competing in Kumite, I had to watch my passion because it wouldn't be taken as passion. It'd be looked at as, oh, he's angry or crazy or, and then the warnings start coming in and coaches are very quick to, hey, calm down. Nothing's wrong. I'm just competing. That's just me.
Fighting.
Right. We're in a fight here in international waters, Brazil. Those guys are talented down there, but that's a lot of those times when you're just competing, and I feel as an African American athlete, it's not just in karate. We look at the Williams sisters in tennis, as you talked about earlier, who have to watch their every move because if they get a little frustrated, well, they have a bad attitude. And if I, score a point and want to show some passion, well, I'm egotistical. And so it's funny how, different generalizations come on when it comes to an African-American athlete compared to what you see with other athletes.
Cheryl, I saw that head nodding. I think some things resonated.
Yeah, I totally, absolutely agree. I have found that, again, not just in karate, it's been in a lot of different aspects of my life where I have to tone myself down. Like even having these conversations, I feel like I have to control what I say and how I say it in order to ensure that those who are receiving this information are open to it. If I come off too passionate or aggressive or assertive, then it may be taken where it'll cross the line of being a stereotypical angry Black woman, right? So I find myself having to consistently watch what I do say and how I approach it. And sometimes I've definitely let my guard down and said what I needed to say, how I needed to say it. But I've definitely had to consistently look at myself before I address something so that whoever is receiving the information is open to it. And I definitely agree with what James said about being passionate within on the tatami. When I was first coming up, I would constantly get warnings for hitting too hard, but if I got hit, it would be a point. And I'm like, I know it's pretty much the same amount, but I would get warnings and somebody else who didn't look like me would get a point for it. And you kind of, again, you have to look at it and reevaluate it, but that's what I find we have to do anyway. In order for us to be able to maneuver within this world, we have to make adjustments in order to ensure what we're trying to accomplish, we're able to accomplish.
It's so interesting, James. I'm gonna let you jump back in here, but I have to get this thought out. It's so interesting you saying that because, when you look at the excitement of sport, right? A lot of the excitement of sport is not just the technical part. It is the passion that people bring to it. And nobody calls, Tom Brady being egotistical or cocky when he cheers. They say he's passionate about the game. He loves the sport. He cares. Somebody else cries after the game. Oh, they care so much. We're sore losers. But when you're not able to be your full self, then you don't really bring your full talent to the table. And that's what's so oppressive about it, right? Is that when we travel and compete and we see other athletes, Agayev or these guys who are phenomenal, they're being their full selves. They're dancing and doing all this, and you're like, I can dance better, and two, let me get loose. And then you try to like tone it down and play the game, and it's like stifling, you know. And so I think that that's something that needs to be addressed, because if we would win, we probably would even win more if we could be our full self. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I know Hanchi is going to speak on this as well, and he's going to bring a different dynamic to it. I can't speak for him, but I do have memories of, you know, Friday night or Wednesday night at the dojo. It was go time. You know, you had your Kumite classes, and if you were lucky, you got to Kumite with the elite kids, and then also, you know, he'd mix some of the teenagers, so it'd be a good time. But even then, in managing these elite athletes that he was creating, he would teach us, hey, you've got to be mindful of being too rambunctious, not because he's against it. And he'd make that very clear. I love the passion. I love the key. I love it all, but we've got to be smart here. And at a young age, it helped me understand, like, okay, it makes sense. And I understand that. And now till this day, previously competing in Colorado in January, you know, I heard Hanchi Hobson, you know, speaking. I could hear his voice, and it reminded me, like, stay relaxed. Even if this isn't going your way, stay relaxed, because you have to live to fight another day.
Right.
I'd like to also speak on, you know, how we are, you know, held to almost a higher level in some respect. And I want to shift gears from karate to baseball, how you guys keep going to tennis. But I don't know if you guys remember, but David, you might remember a guy that played shortstop for St. Louis Cardinals, a guy named Ozzie Smith.
Yes, sir.
Ozzie Smith used to command the entire field at shortstop. And, you know, somebody would, you know, hit the ball up the center, right past the pitcher. On another team, that would be, okay, a good hit. But Ozzie, since he could span so much, if he didn't get that ball, if he didn't pick that ball up, guess what? That was an error for him. And you go, wait a minute, time out. Why is he getting an error? When everybody else, that would have been just a great, honest hit. But that's just what it is when you are doing so much. So when you do get hit and you go, okay, well, that's, you know, how hard we can get hit, because they gave him a point, and you hit somebody else the exact same, and they go, oh, wait a minute, that's too much contact. That's, you know, it's one of those things you just kind of go, man, that's not right. And I can speak at my own experience back in, I think it was 1990 at the Nationals. We had team championships for like the Pan American. So it was, well, it might have been the North American Cup. They didn't really call it. I don't know what they did back then. But we had Canada and Mexico, and we were just fighting teams. But it was at our national championships. So what basically had happened was I knocked this guy out with a round kick, because he kind of dove into the kick. And I was going to get ready to go for medal matches right after that. And I totally understood it. You know, I get it. Too much contact, my fault. So they disqualified me. 2 hours later, I'm fighting in this team trial, and I'm fighting this guy, and from Canada. He was the heavyweight guy. He was like right at 6'11", and I'm 5'7"3/4 on my best day. And he broke my nose, I had a black eye, a small black eye here. His nose, and they gave him a Wazari, a half point back then. And I go, what? Are you kidding me? And I understand you got nationals and you got international, and you know, but I was just like, man, hold on, wait a second. I didn't draw blood over here. And this guy, I mean, gets a point. It's just one of those things. But yeah, so that is my experience with, wait a second, something has to level out here. And, you know, of course, he didn't look like me.
And that being said, I just want to add to that. It's just a matter of accepting those things, making the adjustments again to make sure the outcome is what you want it to be. So yes, we find ourselves in these different types of situations that we need to just include that in our training or in our mindset, because the ultimate goal, whether that's to be on the team, on the team to then do well at Pan Ams to Worlds to K1s, and you know, right now it's the Olympics, right? So yes, these are definite things that we ourselves have to go through. It doesn't always feel good that we have to accept it, because we see on the other end of it, it's not the same. However, our ultimate goal in this particular case, we're talking about karate and sport karate, is to win. So we need to just put that part of our rule to make sure that we're at the top.
And James, you wanted to jump in?
Well, no, you know, we could talk all day about these different topics, so I'm going to let the questions keep flowing. But, you know, everyone kind of resonated with what I was going to say, and that's just understanding as an African-American athlete that it's bigger than just competing. And I believe you actually made a song about that, you know, and I listened to that one during a warm-up along with the Lenny Kravitz. But you know, you definitely got to realize that it's just more than just competing. And as you said, you know, having that extra pressure, having that extra thought as you're on the tatami does play a role. You know, maybe you can't go for the full kazami like you want to. You got to make a move to make it more clean. And why do you have to do that? Well, because we know it's going to happen if we hit hard. Right. And so it adds an extra dynamic to our game.
Yeah, and that layer is it's a tough one, right? Because if I take that hit and act like it doesn't hurt me, I might be able to play that off, but the brother who comes behind me, it might affect him negatively, because I've actually reinforced the stereotype being, oh, they're super tough, they can take it. And so by reinforcing that and taking it, because I don't want to lose this match or I don't want to act out of nature, I've actually reinforced the stereotype, which could in turn harm those who are coming behind me. And so
always trying to play, it's always a kind of a conflict and just balancing. We're always trying to balance. And so that goes to being constricted and not being our full selves, right? So yeah.
Extremely exhausting. And then you realize, you know, and this goes into my next question actually, you know, about international travel. But I think about even like the first time I saw the Brazilian team, I was like, man, they get to get loose. You know, like they just get to be themselves. I mean, I wish I could go for it like that, you know, but, you know, different culture, different expectations, whatever may have you. But all of you have had opportunities to travel internationally and compete. In what ways is the experience similar or different when you travel just as being a Black athlete? You know, a lot of our context has been around being a Black karate athlete in America, right? But when you travel that first time and go and compete abroad, is it a different experience? Have you ever felt targeted or stereotyped, or is it similar? We'll start with you this time, James. What are your feelings?
So I'd have to say, you know, there are definitely the stereotypes that pop up, you know, internationally, and I don't make excuses for any of it. At the same time, where a lot of these stereotypes come from, I do believe they come from a more genuine place where they're really asking questions about rap music. Now, why I happen to be the expert on rap music, I don't know, but I'd assume why they were asking that. And, you know, they just talk about, you know LeBron James? Now, LeBron James is obviously the biggest athlete in our country. At the same time, it's just interesting that you asked me specifically about LeBron James and rap music, but none of the other team members. So, you know, it's one of those things where, as I said, you know, I do believe that internationally, a lot of my experiences, they were meant to be positive and genuine. At the same time, they still are what they are. And that's just, you know, a tidbit of some of the experiences I've had internationally.
Brian?
Yeah, I just want to backpedal. See, that depends on, you know, LeBron James being, you know, your era and what everybody knows overseas. When I was on the team and we went to Taiwan back in '86, Michael Jackson floated on Earth. You understand what I'm saying? And if you happen to, that today were asking me about Michael Jackson, but guess what? When we actually had a team, I guess, social with the U.S. team and the Japan team and the Taiwan team. And, you know, we happened to have another black guy, and his name was Michael. And, oh, man, he was signing autographs at that point. But, yeah, just a different sign of the times, but exactly the same situation almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cheryl, you've competed at probably more internationally than anybody in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What's your experience been like as far as how you've been treated, what you've seen, what you felt?
A lot of different levels. Just in traveling and going to different countries, seeing people who look like me at the airport was something that I would take note to. The first time I went to Dubai, I didn't see anybody who really looked like me unless they were of African descent. The second time I went to Dubai, I saw groups of people who looked like me. And again, I'm like with one of my teammates, and I'm like, I can't talk about it because I'm excited. I'm like, yes, like that's a positive thing that we're, you know, as a community, we're moving forward and being able to travel in different countries that we otherwise wouldn't even think about going, right? Then traveling, my hair has been like the talk all the time, whether my hair is in braids or whether my hair is in my normal twist. Sometimes in training, if other people from other countries will come and my hair is like this, it's why are you wearing your hair like that? So a lot of that happens when it comes to my hair, and at some point, you know, it becomes, whether it's a positive thing and just trying to figure out a different culture, or it's at this point, whatever year it was, 2015 to 2020, it's at this point you go, I mean, you should know something about Black people with natural hair. Like, it's a natural thing that comes out of your head, right? And then just taking note to going to international competitions and just noticing if other people do look like you at these competitions. And it is a rarity, though there are definitely people more so in international competitions who do look like you, and you may have like a little look to kind of acknowledge that other person. But then I will take a step further, and again, I mentioned this before, as to looking at how many is in each division. And I'll take it even one more step further. If there's only a couple of them, why is it they're in the first pool? They're in one pool and they're fighting against each other third round. So I'll take note to things like that as well. I mean, it's happened to me in USA Karate. There aren't too many people who look like me, and somehow me and Brandy are always, like, if we end up fighting each other, we're always in the same pool, right? So, and it's just something I take note to.
Right.
So looking at those different aspects in international and finding people who do look like me is something, because it doesn't normally happen. I definitely take note to in different parts of my travel to an international competition while I'm also in an international competition.
Yeah. I just want to add in real quick. You know, Cheryl, with you speaking on that, and then David thinking back to your question of being the one of the only. It's almost, instead of being a token, it's more like we're an exhibit. And I say that in the sense of, you know, you look at, oh, the hair, oh, you know, this is a Black fighter, and we're equal, right? Yeah. And I know that's a deep, you know, that could metaphorically be deep, but I said it for what it is. It's almost like, you know, it's an exhibit type of, whoa, you know, a Black karate athlete. Absolutely. And with an intention to be positive, it could still be negative. Yeah. And I don't believe that our organizations do a great job marketing or even showing the diversity that karate actually holds, which could then help solve some of these generalizations and
inclusion.
Right, and inclusion. And I know we're going to talk about that as well. But yeah, so I just wanted to just add that little piece on there.
Yeah, I mean, you did hit the nail on the head with something that comes up, is this idea of like, well, what can be done in dojos and in competition arenas to create a more welcoming environment, because it's exhausting, right? When you feel like everybody's watching you for various reasons and you're like, man, I can't even just sit here. Like, Lord, don't let you sit there and eat some chicken or something. But, like, oh my goodness. I mean,
have a little watermelon, geez.
Oh my goodness. But what do you guys think to create a more inclusive environment in some of these dojos and in the competition arena? And I'm going to turn on you, Brian, first, because you've done, you've done it all. You've been a coach. You're a sensei in your own dojo. You've competed at the highest of levels, and now you're a referee as well. So what's your advice?
I think we need more outreach, honestly. And with that outreach, I think we need to sponsor seminars with athletes like James and Cheryl, to try to put people who look like those people in these different urban areas, or not necessarily urban, suburban areas or country area, wherever they are. But where sometimes those dojos are predominantly has ethnic minorities, and maybe do a set of seminars there, and provide possible scholarships as well. If you really want to get into, trying to diversify the Black population, because let's get it straight. The Hispanics, they come to USA Karate, and so they don't seem like they have a problem with getting there. God bless them. I love them all to death, but we just don't. I don't think we have enough Black representation, and we could do that, I think, by just that outreach.
And to add to Hanshi Hobson's statement, the Hispanic culture in karate is a bit more marketed than karate in the African American community, and so Hanshi Hobson's correct. You see a lot of Hispanic culture in karate as well, and I love to see it. At the same time, does USA Karate help? And not just USA Karate, every karate organization, do we do a good job reaching out to try to create that marketing scheme or whatever it may take to to create a sense of inclusion for African-American athletes?
And let me also add to that as well. I've had friends when I was in graduate school down in Alabama, and some of my fraternity brothers, they go, "Where are you going now? I said, I got to go to practice. Said, what kind of practice? I go to karate practice over here at University of South Alabama. And they look at me and kind of go, I didn't know Black people did karate. And this is in 95. Black people do karate. And they're not joking. They were dead serious. And I went back after I graduated, back in 97. I hadn't been back till this year. So I went and revisited some of my old fraternity brothers down there during Mardi Gras, right before all of this broke out. And, I even had one of my best friends said, man, be quite honest, I don't remember ever anybody in my neighborhood doing karate. And when I went to their dojo, when it was at the University of South Alabama, it was this huge, big gymnasium, and it would be at least 60 people, all ages, doing karate at the same time. I was the only one. So number one, was the dojo welcoming to Black folks? Did they reach out to Black folks? Or did Black folks just have, this stigma of that's not for us? Maybe so it's probably twofold. It's probably, we need to re-educate ourselves. And at the same time, those dojos need to open up their doors and say, hey, we're here and we're open to you.
I would also add to that, there needs to be what James also said about diversifying across the board. But I'll just talk about USA Karate and kind of the World Karate Federation as well. It needs to diversify from top to bottom, meaning like the board down to delegation, so that when these things do come up, it can be addressed from that level. And then now there is some sort of outreach to be had, because it is important within the culture of the federation. The same thing with the World Karate Federation. At one point, there were not a lot of women referees. I'll just talk about referees for the World Karate Federation. and there weren't a lot of women who were able to wear hijabs, right? So all of a sudden, I mean, you see a lot of women, and you see a lot of women wearing hijabs, refereeing. So something must have happened in order for that to take effect. So the same thing has to happen within specifically our organization, to where everything has to diversify, whether it's 50-50 women to men, and then within that there has to be a certain percentage of Hispanics or minority, whatever that may mean, so that when those conversations do come up, it's taken, I say seriously loosely, but it's taken to where it's something that we need to do, and it's not just an excuse. Because I again talk from my experience, I felt I had to word things differently, so it wouldn't be the Black girl is talking about this, and that's the only reason why she's talking about it, not really looking at the actual issue at hand. It's just who it's coming from. Now, there was somebody else who may have looked like me, had a similar experience, then it may have been, oh, okay, well, we need to look at this a little bit differently and see what we need to do in order to try to make some sort of change. So I think from top down, there needs to be a huge way that we are now more diversified. So then I feel it will trickle down to now where referees, athletes, just the delegation as a whole, coaches, everybody, there is a sense of representation, so that there are more people to look for, to have that kind of support.
And I'm so glad you said the word representation, because that's what we started this conversation off with, right? Is the idea of representation. And what representation does is it brings more voices into the room, right? And so it eliminates the space for people to go unheard, or for people to feel like, Cheryl, what you're mentioning, where if I say it, they're going to assume that it's just a one-off thing. But if there's 2 or 3 of us who are saying, actually, we've all experienced this, now it's something that has to be heard and recognized. And that's not just for the Black karateka, it's for every subgroup that you may have, whatever the percentage breakdown of involvement, there should be that level of representation at every level, right? So if you have 30%, competitors that are Black, then we should see 30%, ideally 30% coaches, 30% referees, and on up the ladder. And I think that, it's very important that we see the benefit of this, because what it does is it provides more diversity to the entire picture, and you're going to get a better result. You're going to get a better result globally, even when you have that diversity. Now, specifically, I want to ask you this, Brian. Again, saying you had the experience of being an athlete, a coach, a referee. In what ways have you seen the Black experience evolve over the years from when you came in, which you mentioned, like, hey, your first couple of teams were pretty diverse, actually. But as you've even ascended to try to be a coach, and I have some other questions there too, but just how has your experience evolved over the years?
Well, I believe that, just like you said, I had a pretty diverse experience, and initially, and then it kind of went the other way. And now when I look at, team members like James and Cheryl and Brian Hilliard, Brian Ramrup, all these guys that are, and Brandy, all these people that are out there doing their thing, and I've got to grin and smile and go, that's great. That is great. And they, I kind of feel like, I blazed a little bit of that trail for them, and I root them on. And but I look at the organization of USA Karate, and I think that, we have some great representation from African Americans like Cleve Baxter, Cedric Sparksdale, those type of things. But I think we need to, I think it would look better. It would make athletes feel better to have that type of representation in coaching, that type of representation in the administration as well. So there's always room for improvement. So So we're on the way. We're on the right track. I think that, but we can improve. Absolutely.
Have you ever attempted or desired to be an official U.S. team coach?
I think, there is a track now that I hear that, you can kind of, work your way up to that point. Honestly, I think if you are a U.S. team member that had a lot of success, when you retire, they kind of push you in that direction and they kind of point you and say, okay, let me get you or whatever. And since I didn't get that push from the beginning, I just said, okay, well, I'll be a coach at my dojo and an athlete. And then a referee, and just do my thing that way.
Yeah, I recognize that for sure. Do you?
Let me backtrack. The person that we used to go heads up all the time with is a team coach now, Dustin Baldus. So they got him as a coach. So they said, why would we need the silver medalist guy? We got the gold medalist guy. So that's just what that was.
Yeah, but if coaching is only based upon how many medals you won,
we understand that.
Perhaps
understand that. Not
right.
necessarily everybody understand. Coaching is, you can be an outstanding athlete but a terrible coach.
Yeah.
You can be a terrible coach without, so it doesn't necessarily make the other one great. Michael Jordan never tried his hand at coaching, right? But we know him and was one of the greatest, if not the greatest.
Absolutely. Cheryl, can you hear me now, Cheryl? I know we had a little connection issues. I wanted to ask you specifically, we've talked about the Black experience, and, karate is mostly a male-dominated sport. Sport karate is mostly male-dominated. In what ways I'll ask this question first. Is there a lack of representation for Black females? And in what ways do you feel this may have differed your experience compared to that of maybe James or Brian?
Black females. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So Black females, I will definitely say there is overall a lack of representation. Though from when I was coming up, though now it definitely has gotten better. Like Natalie and I became friends because we went to I believe it was the 2002 University World Championships.
Natalie Wood.
Yeah. And that's when we first met, and we were sitting next to each other. And again, everybody wanted to take pictures with us, and I was trying to figure out what it is. And she was like, you do know why, right, Cheryl? And I'm like, oh, okay, great. So it has gotten better, but there's definitely some work to do. I saw Vanessa Norton as well. She was on the Netherlands team. But I didn't really see coming up in my experience a lot, but it definitely has gotten better to where there is better representation, but it's nowhere near where it should be in comparison.
Brian, I know you have to go here soon. Before you leave, I'd like you to answer the question of what changes would you like to see happen to try to make for a better experience for not only Black Karate Cop, but really it's the entire sport, right? But specifically what we're talking about, what changes would you like to see happen?
That's a loaded question. I might have to think about that one. But I think I think they did a good job. When Cheryl won gold medal one year and she was #1 on the team trial, they had the very next year at the Nationals, they had a big old banner with her up there and her face. I think she was punching somebody or whatever. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Yeah. That is great. Back when I was competing, they didn't have finals. Everything was right there in that ring that morning. And you won your gold medal and you put it in your bag and you rolled out after that. And that was it. And but nobody knew, if you had access to who won what, or somebody told you, or you wrote somebody, or you gave somebody a call. Other than that, you didn't know who won what, you know, because so much was going on. But I really like that idea of highlighting any athlete that wins and is representing the U.S. So they need to continue with that. I like how they do it at the end. But that's always a good thing to, you know, put a face with karate.
Absolutely. James, I'm going to throw a big one at you, man. If you cool with that. You know, you personally expressed moments where you've actually considered quitting as a competitor. And I'll have to say, you know, before I knew you, and I'm going to go ahead and say this, I think Cheryl might have felt the same. Like when I first saw you, I was like, that boy got something. You know, I could tell when you were warming up, you know, athletically, the swagger, and then the skill set too. I was like, he has everything that it takes. And I saw the same thing with shout outs to Mike Watts, right? Like just sometimes you just see the it factor. And so when I heard that you had considered potentially, and Kenneth too, I don't want to throw nobody's name out, but Kenneth too, I see it, you know. But when you see that and then you hear that they might be considering quitting, as a younger athlete, what were some of the rationale behind that? And what changes would you like to see happen for the future of USA Karate?
So, and you're right, it's a deeper question. So for me, there were actually two different reasons. I actually did step away from karate for a good amount of time. I believe 6 years. I stepped away from karate from the age of 15 to 20. And I was able to experience some different sports, but my love for karate never went away, so I came back. But with that being said, we'll address that first part of why I really stepped away. And Hanshi Hobson actually talked about it within our own community. I would like to see a change within our own community. And I say that in the sense of, as African-American karateka, we've got to push karate in martial arts and what it can do for our people. And not just our people, but everyone. But specifically when we talk about African-American men and women, and just like you and everyone else in this group, hold karate to their heart and scope business and life decisions and everything else. It usually stems from our love and our passion for martial arts. And so within our community, at an early age, I felt a lot of resistance. You're going to karate, why aren't you playing football or basketball with us? And so our community can, do a better job progressing the sport, but not just progressing the sport, using it for what it actually does, and that is progresses a positive lifestyle. But as far as within competing and wanting to step away, and this was just recently more than anything, as Cheryl actually played a really big role helping me understand my purpose in karate. But there were some things that I was unhappy with. And when it comes to recent situations where Black Lives Matter has become a very big highlight or spotlight, that's great that it's a spotlight right now, but we're dealing with issues that have gone on for a very long time. And so as an African-American athlete in martial arts and in karate, I did look to our leadership to speak on and essentially, for lack of a better term, have our back. And I didn't feel that they did enough. And the truth of the matter is that USA Karate specifically has done some great things, such as when Cheryl won, they had her on the banner. And as Hanshi Hobson talks about, they try to highlight athletes to the best of their ability. So this is not a knock to USA Karate, AAU, but what I'm asking to see is a bit more. And I can't harp enough on the fact that I understand that they have done, they've made moves towards progression. But for me as an athlete, I felt like they didn't push enough to educate their community or use their power to help a systemic issue that we've seen in society. So for me, when it came to karate at an early age, it was resistance within my own community. I didn't feel welcome to the fact that, hey, I'm a martial artist. It was like, I need to go be playing basketball or whatever. And so then later, more recent times, I felt resistance, and I wouldn't even call it resistance. I didn't feel the compassion and empathy that I would expect my leadership and the people that I'm willing to step in a ring and, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, leave it all on the mat for. So I didn't see that reciprocation. And I would like to see that moving forward with, again, you know, more marketing schemes. Nothing's wrong with what has been done. I just don't believe enough has been done. And I believe that there needs to be a more urgency and a higher priority for creating inclusion within karate and martial arts in general. So I hope that did answer the question.
Oh, yes, brother. I appreciate that. You know,
I'll talk for another 20 minutes if you want me to.
No, I think what you're essentially saying is like, look, we invest our bodies and our time and money into this organization. And because of that, the organization is able to build itself up and do all kinds of things. They should reinvest right back into those who have sacrificed for them. And regardless of whatever that cause may be, whatever that issue may be, we're not asking for more, we're asking for what's deserved. And that's really, and what we're asking for is nothing beyond what anybody should ask for. So it's not something that's surreal. So I respect you for standing your ground on that, and recognize that you stepping on that tatami allows some other young kid to see themselves. So it's bigger, it is bigger than you, you know, and we were able to see Cheryl, and I sought out Brian Hobson when I first would go to competitions. I just made myself go speak to him, you know, because I saw something in him that reminded me of my father, and everybody needs that, whether it's a young girl or a Latino competitor, whatever it may be. You need somebody you can look to so you feel like I belong here, right? So don't ever, that's my little lesson to you, my brother. But
I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, all day.
And if I can just
go ahead.
add in just real quick, you know, I think the great part about this, and I've seen it in USA Karate now, I'm sure Cheryl has a ton more experience and a ton more stories from past times. But currently, I do see that this is an opportunity to just start the conversation. And let's go from there. Let's get the right people around the table, and the right people being the leadership of these organizations and African-American competitors. And let's start to have this conversation on how we can do more to create inclusion. I've had some discussions with some of the team coaches, and some of the team coaches have been open to at least hearing and trying to understand. So for myself, and I'm sure for Cheryl too, who's still competing, we'd love to start that conversation and not just have an empty conversation, but have a conversation that drives progression with real goals, real attainable goals, and then go get those goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree with it. There has to be a plan. Definitely has to be a plan, and not just empty. What steps are necessary for us to make sure that what we are discussing, it actually has some action steps behind it.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that's what Karate for Change is about. You know, this is bigger than just this conversation, hopefully. So, you know, I want to thank each one of you for taking the time to be vulnerable and speak your truth. I know that Hobson had to bounce, but I want to thank him as well for speaking. I want to thank everybody who listens to this, and recognize that to be a part of this conversation is committing to the fact that you recognize that there is room for growth, and there's always room for growth. So if we look at just as a karateka, you never perfect it, right? It's a lifelong art. And as human beings, you never perfect being a human being. There's always room for growth. And karate is just a microcosm of who we are off the tatami. And so those issues that are going on outside of the arena, those come with us when we come into the arena, and we should be allowed to speak to those and ask for the same justice on and off the tatami. So again, I want to thank you guys for being a part of this conversation. And hopefully this is not the last one.